You're watching the Stories That Scare channel. There is no turning back now. I will get you in Stars Hollow.
Three True Gilmore Girls. A Year in the Life. Winter Horror Stories. Hey everybody, I'm glad y'all stopped by. Tonight, we're visiting one of television's coziest small towns. Stars Hollow. On November 25th, 2026, Gilmore Girls. A Year in the Life reaches its 10-year anniversary, exactly a decade after premiering on Netflix on November 25th, 2016. The revival brought fans back to Stars Hollow through 4 feature-length episodes: winter, spring, summer, and fall. For this video, we're only talking about winter, the snow-covered streets, Luke's diner, twinkling Christmas lights, fresh coffee, the gazebo, the peaceful charm that made millions of people wish Stars Hollow were real. But what if something else had been waiting, just beneath the snow? These aren't recaps. These aren't theories. These are 3 original horror stories, inspired by the feeling of a quiet winter in Stars Hollow. Whether these stories are true, I'll let y'all decide. Story 1, The Fifth Porch Light. Every winter, I make it a tradition to rewatch Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life. I brew a pot of coffee, wrap myself in a blanket, turn off every light except the Christmas tree, and disappear into Stars Hollow for a few hours. One snowy evening, after finishing the winter episode, I looked outside my own front window. My neighborhood was completely covered in snow. For some reason, it reminded me of Stars Hollow. Quiet, peaceful, almost too quiet. Across the street, 5 houses sat in a perfect row. Each porch glowed with a warm yellow light. I smiled. It looked exactly like something from the show. Then, without thinking, I counted them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I frowned. There should have only been 4 houses. I've lived on this street for 6 years. There has never been a 5th house. I stepped closer to the window. It looked old, white siding, dark shutters, a wreath hanging neatly on the front door, snow piled perfectly across the roof. It looked like it had always been there. Yet, I knew it hadn't. I grabbed my coat, stepped outside. The cold air bit through my sweater. Every house looked exactly as it always had. Except, there it was, the 5th house, sitting quietly at the end of the street. A soft yellow porch light glowed through the falling snow, and just as I started walking toward it, the front door slowly opened. The porch light flickered once. Then, the front door opened all the way. No one stepped outside. I stood there for several seconds, waiting, listening. Nothing. The only sound was snow crunching beneath my boots. I slowly walked across the street. The closer I got, the stranger everything felt. The mailbox had no numbers. The driveway had no tire tracks. Even though fresh snow covered the ground, there wasn't a single footprint leading to the house. Not one. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. The wreath hanging on the front door looked familiar. It was decorated with tiny red berries, just like the one hanging outside Lorelei's house in winter. I smiled. What a coincidence. Then, a voice behind me quietly asked, "Looking for someone?" I turned around. An elderly woman stood on the sidewalk holding grocery bags. I pointed toward the house. I've never noticed this place before. She looked where I was pointing, then looked back at me. "There's no house there." I laughed. "Right there, the one with the porch light." Her expression changed. Slowly, she backed away. "You shouldn't be outside tonight." Before I could ask what she meant, she hurried into her own home and locked the door. I looked back toward the porch. The front door was still standing open. Warm, golden light spilled across the snow. For reasons I still can't explain, I climbed the steps. The house was warm, almost too warm. It smelled like coffee, cinnamon, fresh pine. Somewhere deeper inside, I could hear quiet conversation. People laughing, coffee mugs clinking together. It sounded comfortable, like Christmas, like Stars Hollow. I stepped into the foyer. The hallway stretched farther than it should have. Much farther, room after room, all softly lit. Every wall covered with framed photographs. Families, Christmases, snowfall, small-town festivals. As I walked closer, I realized something. Every photograph featured different people, different decades, different clothing, but always the same house. Then I found one, taken in black and white. A family of 5 stood smiling on the front porch. Behind them hung the exact same wreath. Only one person wasn't smiling. A young man, standing slightly apart from everyone else. His eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at me. I took a step backward. The picture changed. The family was still there. Only now there were 6 people. The 6th person was me, standing at the edge of the porch, covered in snow. Staring directly into the camera, I dropped the frame. Glass shattered across the hardwood floor. Instantly, the laughter stopped. The coffee cups stopped clinking. The house became completely silent. Then, footsteps, dozens of them, somewhere upstairs, somewhere below me, somewhere behind every closed door, all walking toward the foyer at exactly the same pace. I ran, out the front door, down the porch steps, across the street. I didn't stop until I reached my own front door. The next morning, the 5th house was gone. There were only 4 homes on my street, exactly as there had always been, or so I thought. That evening, I started another rewatch of Winter. Near the end of the episode, there's a wide shot of Stars Hollow covered in snow, the gazebo, Luke's, Taylor's Market, all the familiar buildings, and there, for less than a second, at the very end of the street, was a white house I'd never noticed before. Its porch light was on. There's something comforting about revisiting your favorite shows. They feel familiar, safe, like coming home. But every now and then, you notice something you swear wasn't there before. All right, let's move on to story number 2. This next story begins inside Luke's diner, or at least a place that looked exactly like it. Story 2. One more cup of coffee. If you've watched Gilmore Girls, you know there's one place everyone eventually ends up. Luke's diner. Morning, afternoon, late at night, someone is always walking through that front door. Coffee, pancakes, cheeseburgers, a quick conversation before heading back out into the snow. It always felt comforting. So when I found a diner that looked almost identical, I couldn't resist stopping. I was driving home from visiting family just after Christmas. The roads were nearly empty. Snow drifted across the highway. That's when I saw it. A small roadside diner. Warm yellow lights, foggy windows, a glowing neon sign. For just a second, I honestly thought it looked exactly like Luke's. I laughed to myself, pulled into the parking lot, and went inside. A little bell chimed above the door. The place was almost empty. Just one waitress, an older man reading a newspaper, and someone sitting alone in the very last booth. The waitress smiled. "Sit anywhere you like." I ordered coffee, of course. She poured it into a thick white mug. The smell alone made me smile. As I looked around, the diner felt strangely familiar. Not because I'd been there before, because it felt like I'd seen it. Hundreds of times. The wood booths, the chalkboard menu, the old clock above the kitchen, the Christmas lights wrapped around the windows. It felt like home. Then I noticed something. Nobody was talking. The waitress moved silently. The man turned newspaper pages without making a sound. Even the coffee pot didn't clink against the mugs. It was as if someone had muted the entire room. Then, the bell above the front door rang. I looked up. No one entered. The door never opened. Yet, every person in the diner looked toward it at exactly the same moment. Then, they all went back to what they were doing. I waited a few minutes. It happened again. Ding! Everyone looked. Nobody entered. The 3rd time, I decided to watch the door. Ding! The bell rang. The door remained closed. But this time, I noticed something. The person sitting in the last booth was gone. I hadn't seen them leave. Their coffee was still steaming. The booth was empty. The waitress suddenly appeared beside me. Without saying a word, she topped off my coffee. As she turned to leave, I finally asked, "Who was sitting back there?" She stopped, looked toward the empty booth, then quietly answered, "The same person who's always there." Before I could ask what she meant, the bell rang again. Ding. Every head turned toward the door, including mine. Standing just outside, looking through the frosted glass, was me, covered in snow, one hand resting on the door handle. Watching myself, I couldn't breathe. I looked back toward my booth. My coffee mug was gone. The waitress frowned. "You've already finished." "I have?" She nodded. "You've been here?" "For hours." I checked my phone. The battery was dead. The clock on the wall read 8:47. The dashboard clock in my car had read 8:52 when I'd pulled into the parking lot. 5 minutes had somehow become hours. I threw cash onto the counter, walked quickly toward the exit. Just before opening the door, I looked back one last time. The last booth was occupied again. Only now, the person sitting there was me, holding a warm cup of coffee, watching the door. Winter has a way of making small places feel cozy. A warm diner, fresh coffee, snow falling outside. Sometimes, the places that feel the safest are the hardest to leave. We've got one last story, and it begins with the first snowfall of winter in a town that wasn't supposed to exist. Story 3. The Snow Globe. I've always loved winter. Not because of Christmas or the cold, but because snow has a way of making the entire world feel quiet. One December evening, I finished watching the winter episode of Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly past the window. It looked exactly like Stars Hollow, the gazebo, the twinkling lights, the coffee, the feeling that time had somehow slowed down. I wished, just for a moment, that I could visit a place like that. The next morning, I decided to take a drive. No destination, just back roads, snow-covered trees, and a thermos full of coffee. About an hour from home, I saw a sign. Stars Hollow, population 987. I slammed on the brakes. I laughed. Someone has a sense of humor. I turned down the road. The town was perfect. White lights wrapped around every storefront. A gazebo stood in the center of the square. A tiny diner sat on the corner. An old bookstore, an antique shop, even a church with a bell tower. Everything looked exactly the way I'd imagined. But there was something off. No cars moved. No children played. No dogs barked. The entire town was frozen in silence. Then, the church bell rang. 1, 2, 3. Every porch light in town turned on. At the exact same moment, I climbed out of my truck. The snow beneath my boots made no sound. None. Not even a crunch. I looked down. There were no footprints behind me. I was standing in fresh snow, but the ground remained untouched. I hurried back toward my truck. It was gone. Not stolen. Gone. The road behind me had disappeared. Only snow. In every direction. I wandered through the square. Every shop window was beautifully decorated. Christmas trees, wrapped presents, fresh pies cooling on windowsills, coffee steaming in mugs. Yet, there wasn't a single person anywhere. Then, movement. Across the gazebo, someone walked between two buildings. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I followed. By the time I reached the alley, no one was there. Instead, I found a tiny gift shop. Its front door stood open. Inside, hundreds, maybe thousands, of snow globes. Every one of them contained a different winter scene. Small towns, cabins, churches, frozen lakes, Christmas markets. I walked slowly between the shelves. Then I saw one. My neighborhood, exactly as it looked. Every house, every tree, every mailbox, even my truck, parked in my driveway, picked it up. Inside, tiny snowflakes drifted endlessly. Then the little front door of my house opened. A miniature version of me stepped outside. He looked around. Then, slowly, he looked upward, right at me. He smiled, raised one hand, and waved. I dropped the snow globe. It didn't break. Instead, every snow globe in the shop began shaking. Thousands of tiny snowstorms, all at once. The room filled with the sound of glass rattling. Then, someone whispered behind me, "You finally found yours." I turned. An elderly shopkeeper stood behind the counter, smiling warmly. He looked almost familiar, like someone I'd seen before, in another town, another story. I asked, "What is this place?" He smiled. "It's where people come when they wish they could live somewhere forever. I looked back toward the globe. The tiny version of me was no longer waving. He was knocking frantically. Trying to get out, I blinked, and suddenly I was sitting in my truck, parked beside an empty snow-covered field. No town, no gazebo, no church, no gift shop. Just a faded wooden post sticking out of the snow. The sign had fallen face down. I flipped it over. The paint had nearly disappeared. Only one word remained. Hollow. I drove home. That night, I watched winter one more time. Everything looked normal, until the final wide shot of Stars Hollow. Snow drifted gently through the town square. The gazebo stood beautifully lit. People walked along the sidewalks. Then, for just a moment, standing beside the gazebo, a man in a winter coat looked directly into the camera. He raised one hand and waved. He looked exactly like me. There's something magical about winter. The snow, the lights, the coffee. The feeling that, for just a little while, the world slows down. Maybe that's why we keep going back. To Stars Hollow. To our favorite shows. To memories that make us feel at home. But sometimes, if you stay just a little too long, home starts looking back. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know which one sent the biggest chill down your spine. Was it the Fifth Porch Light? One more cup of coffee? Or the snow globe? And if Gilmore Girls has ever become one of your annual winter traditions? Or you've ever experienced something strange while watching a favorite comfort show? Tell me about it in the comments. Who knows? Your story might appear in a future episode. Until next time, keep the fires burning, and as always, I'll tell the stories if you'll stay scared.